this dramatic start. I want to start by saying hello to everybody. Thank you for the invitation. Special hi to the authorities, to the ecclesiastical authorities, to the political authorities. Special thank you for Sister Dhjetor for inviting me. And let me introduce myself first. It has been a good introduction, but I'm the director of an NGO called OIDEL. OIDEL is an NGO specialized on freedom to education from an international perspective. And whenever there is a discussion on freedom of education, we are there, and that's why we are here to talk about these topics with you. What I would like to do today, here, briefly, is to introduce to you the state of situation of freedom to education at the European level, introducing you how this freedom is recognized at the European level, and what is the state of the discussion and the landscape at the European Union level. So, when we talk about, I bring my computer with me, which is not working, so I'm going to put it aside. And so when we're talking about the European Union, and we talk about freedom of education, the first document we have to take a look is the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. And freedom of education is defined in two important pillars. First, the freedom to found educational establishments, first pillar, and second, the right of parents to choose education they want for their children. It is really important because this choice has its own place. It's not like the same choice of going to a market and buy whatever you want. It's a choice in order they can adapt their educational choices to the religious, philosophical, and pedagogical convictions. So this is an answer of the plurality of the European society, also in the educational field. Also, it's relevant. Also, it's relevant to take in mind that this is an important issue for Europe, and recently in 2018, talking about inclusiveness in education, what I think they mention is the importance of public funding for educational choice. Otherwise, the only ones who will be able to enjoy this freedom would be the families with no income, and this would not be inclusive. And another important part of that is that they say, well, they encourage the states of the European Union to publicly support the different schools the different non-governmental schools as far as they are non-profit. So what is the landscape? What is the landscape? Well, OIDEL, just to give you a context, OIDEL does every few years a report called the Freedom of Education Index, which enables us to see what is the state of situation of freedom of education in the world. And I want to share you a little bit some of the results of that so you can have an idea of what is the state of situation of freedom of education. And this is really interesting because we hear a lot of things about freedom of education index. About freedom of education, we feel like a democratic country should have only and exclusively a public system, but when we go into details, we will realize that it's actually strong democracies also have a strong pluralistic system. So let us start by the Constitution. 82% of the constitutions of the European Union, and that's 22 out of 27, recognize freedom of education in their constitutions. Some countries they don't, but then when they go into the constitutional course, like France, the constitutional course recognizes freedom of education as a pillar of the right to education. Also, it's important to mention that some countries, such as the Netherlands or Slovenia, even recognize the importance of public funding to non-governmental schools to grant this freedom, because they say, like, if parents have to pay extra to exercise this freedom, this is not a real freedom. This is a privilege. Let's talk about funding. Don't worry, I'm going to explain that, because if you just look at it, it's extremely boring, but now I'm going to make this really interesting. So, one interesting thing that we get from that images is like 78% of the countries of the European Union at least fund the salaries of the teachers of non-governmental schools, which is, as you all know, an important part of the cost of non-governmental schools. There is only one country today that doesn't provide any sort of funding to non-governmental schools, which is Greece. And if you see all these green colors here, it's because since 2016 until now, there has been a positive tendency. So it's true that there is a lot of political tensions around educational pluralism, again, around freedom of education, but yet, despite the COVID crisis, despite the political tension, despite the tendency in European Union countries is that there is more funding to non-governmental schools now than in 2016. There is, of course, some exceptions, such as, for instance, my own country, Spain, but which the new law is more restrictive. But overall, the positive is the tendency is positive. And then finally, it's also important to see the level of enrollment in non-governmental schools in Europe. As you see, all these things that we move from green, it's like these are countries that have, since 2016 until now, there has been an increase of students in non-governmental schools. There is a few exceptions, like Greece, Ireland, Italy, or Spain. And what we can tell is like the level of students attending non-governmental schools is really dependent on the support of the state. So when the state gives more support to non-governmental schools so parents can choose the education they want for their children despite their income, usually there is an increase of students attending these schools, and the other way around. So trends and conclusions. This is a really simple conclusion, which is despite the political noise that exists, and it's growing, educational pluralism and the funding to non-governmental schools is increasing all over Europe. So my conclusion basically is like, I encourage you, all my Albanese friends, this is a cornerstone of European democracies. Like if a democracy is a system that, as you know, trusts their citizens, and education cannot be an exception. Therefore, if we want to trust our citizens in all the fields, it's also important that we have an educational frame in which parents can choose and the different communities can develop their own educational systems despite of their income. Thank you so much.